Hello guys, welcome to class. Alright, so in today's class we are going to be discussing something interesting and important as well, and that is the DNA. Okay, so I know you must have heard about the DNA in few instances or in few places. Alright, so in this video we are going to be walking through the details of the DNA. Now it is very important that we have basic knowledge of the DNA because it applies in cases where the paternity of a child is in dispute. Alright, so what happens is that you just go to the laboratory and they carry out what we know as DNA sequencing. Alright, so this is a method that shows the placement of genes in organisms. Alright, now this method uses a technique known as the PCR, that is the polymerase chain reaction. The polymerase chain reaction techniques. Alright, so it shows the sequence of the genes. Alright, so it's expected that there must be an alignment between the gene of the man and the child, alright, for the child to be called the man's biological child. Alright, so that is that. So let me go into the details of the DNA now. The DNA in details. The DNA is actually an acronym that stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Now it's important to know that the nucleic acid exists in two forms. It exists as DNA and also as RNA. Okay, so I'm going to be giving you the difference between DNA and RNA on three distinct bases. The first base is on the type of organic base they contain. Secondly, their structures. And thirdly, the location of their distribution. Alright, so let's look at the type of organic base. Now, basically, in nucleic acid, we have 5 types of organic base, which are broadly placed in 2 categories: the purines and the pyrimidines. The purines and the pyrimidines. Alright, now under the purines, we have 2 of them: the adenine and the guanine. Okay, now move over to the pyrimidines. For the pyrimidines, we have 3 of them. They are the cytosine, the thymine, and the uracil. All right, so out of these 5 different bases, the DNA has the adenine, the guanine, the cytosine, and the thymine without the uracil. So the uracil is not present in the DNA, but the uracil rather is present in the RNA. So the RNA contains adenine, guanine, cytosine, and uracil. The RNA does not contain thymine, but the DNA contains thymine. So in place of the thymine, the RNA contains uracil. Okay, now let's look at them, the differences in terms of their structure. Now, the differences in terms of structure: the DNA actually is a double-stranded helical structure. That means it has 2 strands and it looks like a twisted object. All right, so the DNA has a structure just like this. This is what the DNA looks like. Okay, so these are the nitrogen containing organic base. So this is the structure of the DNA. Structurally, it is helical in structure, in nature, and then it contains 2 strands. This is strand 1 and this is strand 2. All right, it contains 2 strands. But the RNA now is made up of just a strand. All right, just a strand, and the organic base it contains. Okay, just a strand and the organic base it contains. So structurally, this is the difference between the RNA and the DNA. Okay, so that's the RNA and this is the DNA. Double-stranded, single-stranded. All right, so let's move to the differences based on their locations. Now, location-wise, the RNA is found in the cytoplasm mostly. in the cytoplasm of the cell. Now, I talked about the cytoplasm of the cell when I discussed the cell structures in my previous video. You can go and look it up. All right. So the RNA is scattered in the cytoplasm. It is mostly responsible for the production of synthesis of proteins and other biomolecules. All right. So that is it. Now let's move over to the DNA. And the DNA actually is found inside the nucleus of a cell. All right. You could remember when I was teaching you about the structures of the cellular organelles, and when I talked about the nucleus, I told you that the nucleus is actually a structure that contains genetic material. All right. And what is the genetic material? It is the DNA. So the DNA is mostly found in the nucleus of a cell. All right. Now, the DNA does not exist on its own. All right. The DNA is in close association with a structure, and that structure is a protein known as the histone. All right. So this is a protein. Now, the DNA is wrapped around the histone in this nature. All right. So this is the histone, and this is the DNA. Okay. And now that brings us to knowing the difference between the chromosome and the DNA. Some people do not know the difference between the chromosome and the DNA. Now, the DNA is just this structure. The chromosome is the collective name for the histone and the DNA. So the chromosome is made up of two structures, the DNA and the histone. That means if you unwind the DNA from the histone, you have two structures, right? The DNA and the protein, which is the histone. All right. So that is the differences between the DNA and RNA in terms of location. All right. Now we're going to look at the chemical nature of the DNA now. All right. Now look at this structure and look at this other structure. They mean the same thing. They are the same thing. All right. So this is like a helical structure. Remember I told you in my other video that the DNA is a double-stranded helical structure. So it's a molecule that has two strands and is twisted. Okay. Now this particular structure is just me picking a part of this structure to study in details. All right. Now before we move into detail now, the DNA is actually made up of three component parts, three important component parts. The first is the nitrogen-containing organic base. Okay. The second is the phosphoric acid or phosphate group. Phosphate group. Okay, and the third is the ribose sugar. Now this type of sugar is the deoxyribose sugar. So these are the three major components of the DNA, nothing more, as simple as this. Okay, now let's look at the structure in details now. Now remember that when I was talking about the nitrogen-containing organic base in my previous video, I mentioned that the ones associated with DNA are adenine, cytosine, thymine, and guanine. Okay, so these are the four associated with the DNA. Now, come close. It is important to note that these ones, they have their partners. All right, they come in pairs. They come in pairs, and so we use this formula often: A, T, G, and C. That means the adenine will always pair with the thymine, and the guanine will always pair with the cytosine. I hope that's clear enough. Now, let's come over to our structure here now. So let's assume these are the organic, nitrogen containing organic base. All right. So if adenine, let's assume this is adenine, what will it pair with? It will pair with a thymine. So this should be a thymine. Okay. All right, let's move to the next one. Cytosine will always pair with what? Guanine. So this will be cytosine, and this the guanine, and it follows that trend down. All right, so nothing more, as simple as this. This will still be adenine, and this other will be thymine. So that's how it follows. So these are the nitrogen containing organic base in DNA. All right, and now they are attached to a structure. Now look at the DNA like a ladder that has different steps. Okay, now these two sides of the ladder holds the steps. All right, so these two parts are the phosphoric or phosphate group and the deoxyribose sugar. Okay, so let's assume this is the phosphate group, this will be the sugar. Okay, it follows, it alternates just like that. Going up will be the phosphate, and this will be the sugar. Okay, so this is just the nature of the DNA, as simple as this. Okay, so it follows that trend. It follows that trend. Now these are collectively known as the sugar phosphate backbone, rather sugar phosphate backbone. All right, so they hold the organic structures in place. Okay, now it is important to note that the smallest unit or the monomer of the DNA is known as the nucleotide. So the nucleotide is the smallest unit of the DNA, and the nucleotide contains a sugar, a phosphate group, and one organic base. All right, so if you have a structure like this, we will assume this is sugar, and this is our phosphate group. Okay, so sugar, phosphate, that's how it goes. I'm just taking out one portion, which is the nucleotide now. So you have the sugar and phosphate. All right, what should join next will be the organic base, right? Okay, so we'll have something like this. And we can decide to name this thymine. Okay, so this structure here is regarded as a nucleotide, the smallest unit of the DNA. All right, so this is just the structure of the DNA, the chemical nature of the DNA. Nothing much, there's nothing, just the sugar phosphate backbone and the organic, nitrogen containing organic base. Okay, so this is the chemical nature of the DNA. Okay, now looking at the RNA now, the RNA actually, like I said in my previous video, is scattered in the cytoplasm. All right, now there are three major types of RNA. We have the ribosomal RNA, the messenger RNA, and the transfer RNA. Now, all these types of RNA, they play key functions in synthesizing biomolecules, proteins, and other biomolecules as well. So this is just an overview of the chemical nature of the DNA. There's nothing attached to this. All right, so as simple as this is the nature of the DNA. All right, so if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please, I beg you to do so, and then like this video and follow me at all my social media platforms. Please, if you have any question, don't forget to engage in the comment section. I'll be there to answer your questions. All right, so thank you, and see you in the next video.